Well, Ruha, as you're doing that, let me give the class a quick context about where this fits in the class. No, not at all.
I was trying to multitask and also talk about myself.
I know, not at all an issue. So, if you remember, we have that framework, right, that we talked about in class in terms of developing ICTD core skills, the conceptual part, and then where we talk about what is international development, what is ICT for D, how, and mapping the international development landscape, ICTD's landscape, and then we're now moving on to that next circle where we're talking about technical applications. Now next, within technical applications, the first session, we would be talking about, the overarching issues. What's bottom of the pyramid? What are some of the trends? Where does innovation fit in? What about policy? And what are some of the overarching implementation issues? So this is sort of the big introductory piece before we delve into the applications of health, agriculture, etc. So I thought it's great that we actually managed to get Ruha, my goodness, thanks to Facebook last night at 8 o'clock, that this would be an awesome introduction to all those kinds of overarching issues from a practical implementation and design point of view. And just as a quick context, in practice, PeaceTones, I come from the big international development world, not as cool as Internet Bar and PeaceTones. And what we like about this is that it's really innovative. It's something that, from a big NGO perspective, it's not something that we would either be able to implement or get funding for it. So would love to learn from you. So with that, Ruha,
cool.
Thank you.
So just to give you a little background about myself, I did communications in undergrad and political science, and then I went to law school because I thought that I graduated from undergrad and felt like I didn't really have any skills, but I knew a lot of the context of issues and problems I wanted to deal with, so I thought, okay, I'll go to law school and then I'll be able to actually fix things. So I went to law school, focused on humanitarian law and human rights law, and also did my master's in international relations. And I graduated from that, and I felt like I still had the same problem. I just understood the problems better, but I didn't really have any solutions. And then, I had a couple of paths career-wise. I could have gone the UN route or a big consultancy firm. But I took a chance on this really small nonprofit, this startup nonprofit back in 2010, because I loved the idea of PeaceTones. My boss, Jeff Arrest, was telling me about it as I was networking and trying to find jobs, and I thought, wow, this melds together all of the things I'm interested in. So I'll tell you a bit more about the project. What we do is work with musicians in post-conflict and post-disaster communities, and we educate them on their rights and then also how to promote and get exposure for their music, specifically musicians who have a social justice message to their music. And the reason we do this is we believe that if you support a form of culture that has huge potential to have impact and has huge potential to spread positive messages, if you support that form of culture by helping the creators of that culture make an income from it, basically create a social enterprise around that form of culture, then you're sort of a starting point or an ignition point for something that can grow and sustain once you've left. And one of the huge problems with development projects, as a lot of you have probably either found out yourselves or learned about, is it's really hard to sustain your impact once you leave the country. So unless you're starting and running a nonprofit or a for-profit in a country and you're staying there, it's hard to see the impact sustain. So we've worked in a ton of different places. We've worked in, I don't know why that happened. Going back. There we go. We've worked in Recife in the north of Brazil with musicians in a slum who are hip-hop and breakdancing musicians. And if you go back to that Discover PeaceTones album, there's one of their songs on there. We've also worked in Freetown, Sierra Leone with reggae artists. We've worked in Balan and Port-au-Prince, so 2 locations in Haiti. and our next project is in Nairobi, Kenya. And the model we take is basically we intervene through musicians. So we identify musicians who have a social justice message, and we teach them practical legal tools that are applicable in their particular context. So coming in as lawyers, and this project started out as a rule of law project. So basically the idea was, if you can get people to find the law useful where they are in their context, then you have a grassroots, adoption of law. That's really the best way to meet top-down policy work in promoting access to justice and rule of law. So intervening through the music sector, we teach musicians about contracts, about intellectual property, about why that's important. We also teach them about technologies that are available in their particular community that they can use to get the word out about their music. So in Haiti, it was things like radio and matatus, which are, no, actually matatus are in Nairobi, but something similar, like minivans that run circuits around the city. They're usually privately owned and run, and people use them as public transport because there isn't necessarily a public transport infrastructure. And those minivans have loudspeakers on the top of them. So one of our artists said, okay, well, people don't necessarily have that much access to YouTube now in post-earthquake Haiti, but everyone's riding in these minivans, so he paid the minivan drivers a small amount of money, like $1 or $2, to blast his music from these speakers. So everyone in Port-au-Prince heard Juanito's music all day, every day for months. And so that's how he climbed from a nobody to like one of the top 5 musicians in Haiti after we released an album with him. So that's technology in one context, technology in a different context, like Nairobi, Kenya, where people are on Facebook, people are very much engaged with YouTube, is teaching those people how to use those technologies not just to consume culture, but to also emit it back out to the rest of the world. We then connect these musicians to international markets by recording and distributing internationally for them. And we send back 90% of the income to the artists. So that's the sustainable income part. For every album that they sell through PeaceTones, if we sell it for $10, they get to keep 9 of it. And then 10% goes back into PeaceTones to kind of sustain, minimally sustain admin costs, but we get our funding through grants and donations. And then the last piece is that we ask our musicians to give a portion of their album income to a community development project that they feel passionately about. So we don't tell them how much to give, we don't tell them who to give to, but we just ask that they complete this circle by giving back to the community that inspired their message in the first place. So why does our work matter with musicians or with creative industries? One thing is we feel that culture is a really, really important tool for communication or for cultural artifacts, and music in particular. And music is very much a cottage industry in a lot of the countries we work in, especially countries that are politically unstable where there isn't the opportunity to grow infrastructure to support the creative industries. So it remains very much craft-based and a cottage industry, a lot like, in a sense, the coffee industry. So you have local producers who are producing the music, and then you've got a whole bunch of middlemen that take a cut all the way up, and if they're lucky enough to be distributed in the global market, it's often a German or a French or an American label that comes in, packages their music, sells it in the developed world, and keeps 80% of the profits because they're doing a lot of work to earn that money. But if you can cut out those people by using technology, which you can now, then more of the money goes to those artists. So AT&T Wi-Fi is really persistent. I'm gonna just turn my Wi-Fi off. There we go. So in a lot of the cities and countries we've worked in, we've found that the relationships amongst artists and the music industry and their audiences are a hybrid of economic and social, as they are here. In the digital age, you don't have to purchase a CD in order to listen to someone's music. It's now something that you choose to do because you value that artist and you want them to make an income. So it's become something, the access to culture issue has become something that is, it's not obligatory anymore for consumers to pay to access. And so this brings up a really interesting situation where you're trying to incentivize people to pay for culture when they don't really have to. And not only incentivize Western audiences, so PeaceTones sells all over the world. We're not just trying to incentivize Americans to pay for a Kenyan artist's music because they want to support that Kenyan artist, but we're trying to incentivize Kenyans to pay for their own artist's music, whatever they can pay. So it may not be $10, it may not be for an album, but maybe it's for performances, or maybe it's for access to merchandise, which, you know, we can't sell in the US, but we could sell in Nairobi. So these are things I can go into later if you're interested, but just from an ICT for development perspective, I guess the main point to take is, depending on what field you're working in or what technology you're working in, it often you're combining development work and human rights theory with knowledge of something that is basically market-based and for-profit model a lot of the time. And so learning how the for-profit world uses those tools is really useful in figuring out how to adapt them to the communities that you're trying to work with. So, as I mentioned before, briefly, the communities we work with are just emerging from conflict and disaster. We don't work in the context of conflict or in the context of disaster because it's really hard to get people to think about music when they're dealing with much more primary needs. But as soon as they're emerging from those situations, one of the really powerful ways in which they can heal and come together is through music. When we were in Haiti in 2010, 6 months after the earthquake, people were living in tents, and you can kind of see here a photo I took in a tent camp just outside of Port-au-Prince. And there was no electricity, so when the sun went down, people had nothing to do, and they would come and sit around in a central tent and just play music and hang out together. And it was a way, one, to get together as a community, two, to have something positive to get together around, and three, also a way to be safe in the dark, being surrounded by a bunch of people. So gathering as a community has all of these different functions, and music especially is one of the ways in which communities gather. So what's our process? We find musicians, we identify a community we want to work in, and then we do a scouting trip where we go to the country. We often publicize that we're there either on public radio or public television. When we went to Haiti, we were lucky enough to get on Haitian national television because it was 6 months after the earthquake and they just didn't have enough content for TV. So they interviewed us for an hour and they said, yeah, we'll cut this down to 5 minutes. But they ended up playing the whole hour every day at prime time. So that was a really lucky break for us, and we got people from all over Port-au-Prince come in to audition with us. But we also went to the tent camps in and around Port-au-Prince and met with the community leaders. So this photo shows a tent camp in Tabar, and they would have a central tent where people assembled to listen to music or have meetings, and there was kind of an ad hoc group of leaders that got together to run logistics of that particular camp. So we identified who they were, we got together with them, talked to them about our project, and then had them publicize what we were trying to do for us. And that's something we do everywhere we go. We try to identify local leaders and have them publicize the work we're doing. One, so there's buy-in from them, and two, because it's much easier to get the word out through a local network than it is for us to come in as outsiders and try to figure out how to do that. And as I mentioned before, context matters. So in Haiti, when we were trying to figure out what tools to use and what tools to teach musicians, it ended up being public radio, it ended up being minivans. But in Kenya, where I'm going on Friday, it's going to be social media a lot. This is a band that lives in a slum on the east side of Nairobi, and their name is Coco Band, and they have thousands of Facebook fans already. So they're not necessarily able to make an income off that community, and so that's what we feel like it's important to teach them. Bands in Kibera on the other side of Nairobi don't necessarily have as much exposure to Facebook or how to publicize themselves on Facebook, and so there's always a variety of levels of knowledge, and we try to address all of those. So we run workshops, as I said, and we bring in, as much as we can, we bring in community partners to run those workshops. So in Nairobi, when I'm going on Friday, we're running workshops with 300 musicians, 100 in each of 3 different slums. And we have 2 intellectual property lawyers flying in from LA to work with us, but we're also identifying lawyers on the ground to come in and talk about local experiences. We're running a social media workshop, and we're having local bands that have succeeded, become viral using social media, come in and tell their stories. Same thing with the youth leadership workshop we're running. There's no point in me coming in and talking about youth leadership in Kibera. So we've identified some really charismatic youth leaders to come up and talk about why they do what they do and why they feel like it's important to engage. And this is an example of the stuff we did in Haiti. So it's literally back then in Haiti, which was 4 years ago now, people were not necessarily on Facebook. It wasn't a big thing. And so we had to walk people through step by step how to sign up, what the difference is between a personal page and a musician's page, and so on. Same thing with legal concepts. What is your intellectual property, and even the concept that creativity can be commodified is something new to some people. So the idea that stuff that's in your head, music and melodies, has value, has monetary value, and can be protected once you've published it, is very new. So we often, when working with lawyers, we kind of have to have a community partner that helps us translate stuff into very simple, very tangible concepts. Another huge part of what we do is create a multimedia ecosystem around the projects that we do. One, because we're trying to tell the stories of these artists not only to people in their own communities, but to people in the States and Canada and France and wherever else we have an audience who don't necessarily understand the language, and so they need some way in which they can identify with these musicians. So we record personal biographies with each of the artists that works with us. And this is, again, our work in Haiti, walking through this guy's house and having him explain what his life is like, what his family is like, why he sings, what inspires him. And then we create Facebook pages for all the artists we work with. And we upload the biography video that we've recorded, music videos that we've recorded of each of them, and headshots or professional photos. So in a sense, what we're doing is creating an electronic press kit for them. And the next step is that we run a contest. So the reason we run a contest is, one, it's a really good way to incentivize people to attend our workshops. And 2, it's a great way to incentivize them to use the tools we've just taught them, like how to set up a Facebook page, how to engage with fans, to use them within a time-constrained project that has an incentive at the end. So the person that wins the contest gets to record an album with PeaceTones. And so that's what we did in Haiti. It's what we're going to be doing in Kenya as well. And even if people, so there's only one winner of this contest, but everyone else who gets to be in the contest gets effectively an electronic press kit, which is really important in today's music industry, where it's not just going around from studio to studio with a tape anymore. You have to have an online presence, and this is something that we help them kickstart. Speaking of Kickstarter, we also crowdfund to release our artist's album. And again, this has 2 functions. 1, it helps us raise money, obviously, but 2, it helps us pre-build an audience for the album when it comes out. And all of these things, like I mentioned before, we were not innovative in the sense that we came up with these things. We're just looking around to the for-profit sector and seeing how people do it there and adapting those things to the developing world context and the development context. Once we fundraised for Juanito, who ended up winning our contest, we recorded in a studio in Boston and had him perform all up and down the East Coast, which is where we used to be based. So he performed in Boston and New York and went on Public Radio International. So again, using both online tools for publicity, but also traditional tools. And then, like I mentioned before, we use social media and we use multimedia a lot to kind of spread the message. So to get exposure for this unknown artist from an unknown nonprofit, we had to think about ways in which we could kind of engage people on multiple levels. And these music videos ended up being a huge way in which we could do that. So if you look at the bottom, Disparición is the contest video we recorded for Juanito when we were in Haiti the first time we were there. And then a year later, when he came to record his album, we recorded Timio. And then a year later, he released his own official music video with professional music video crews in Haiti once he had accumulated enough resources to publish himself. And then at the top of that is actually the top two videos you can see are from users who are not Juanito and they're not PeaceTones. They are third-party users who picked up Juanito's music video and if you look at the photo at the top there, that's a photo I took 3 years ago. So it's third-party users picking up our content and republishing it, and they have more views than we have for our videos. So that's another thing that you see even here in the US musicians context, the tension between sort of like creating your own product and being able to monetize it and capitalize on that, and having piracy and having other people pick up your work and publicize it themselves, and often run YouTube ads on them and make revenue from your art. And that's the tension I'm talking about when we talk about hybrid economies. There's no point going into Haiti or Kenya and teaching people about intellectual property and how to protect your rights and how to sue people when they cover your art on YouTube. We do teach them that, but we also teach them about the balance between that and getting exposure for your work from someone who's obviously a fan and is just trying to kind of propagate your work. Go ahead.
Sorry if you're going to mention this later, I might miss it, but with PeaceTones, I see that you guys want the post-conflict areas and whatnot. How strict are you guys on that? You also say there was another country where the idea would work perfectly well, but war isn't the issue that they're dealing with. There's something else that you can do.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we have worked in communities like that, like in Brazil. I don't think Brazil has ever been in a war. Maybe a tiny one over like that little body of water over the river. But the particular community in which we work is a very high conflict zone in the sense that there's a lot of violence in that community, gang warfare. And there's a lot of poverty that is associated with that because people aren't able to engage with resources and move resources around freely enough because of the violence. So we chose to work in that community for that reason. Kenya as well hasn't been in an interstate war for a while, but in Nairobi in the 2008 election time, there was a lot of violence around tribal issues, and so that's what we're addressing in Nairobi. Tribal conflict, tribal tension, and we're working with musicians who have a message of unity under like a national identity or a citywide identity, as opposed to taking on tribal differences as their way to create and perpetuate violence.
So maybe just to follow up, so are you now at the point where people or communities approach you, or do you still seek them out?
That's a good question. Communities don't approach us so much, but people from the communities we've worked in do. So we have a lot of musicians from Haiti that message us and say, listen to my song, tell me what you think. We have a lot of people, because we've been publicizing that we're about to arrive in Nairobi, we have a lot of artists from Kenya and from Nairobi contact us and say, listen to my music, watch my music video. So we do have a lot of that happening. And one of the ways in which we're thinking of expanding what we do is to create sort of a separate record label that just takes in artists from all these communities we've worked in, publishes their music, sends back a majority of the profits, but doesn't run the whole cycle of workshops and stuff like that. So we have still this like majority profits going back to the artists, and then the ability for them to contact us for mentorship, but not the entire cycle of PeaceTones. And then, you know, just this is something we teach the artists as well, but now with YouTube and Facebook and all of these ways in which to reach out to people, you have metrics on the back end where you can study who your audience is, who you impact, right down to whether they're male or female or what country they're coming from, which is really useful in terms of thinking about targeting your message to audiences, and also really useful for figuring out things like touring. If you want to tour as a musician living in Haiti and you say, well, I live here, I don't know how much of a fan base I have in the DR, you can see that, and these metrics are mostly for Juanito. Juanito has a huge fan base in the DR, and he's able to see this on the back end here. Also, most of his audience is male, so I don't really know how he can target his message to that, but maybe he can grow his female audience somehow. So I talk about distribution a little bit. What's really funny is when we talk about what PeaceTones does, a lot of people ask whether we're trying to compete with iTunes and replace them. And I would love if we were actually competitive with iTunes. We're not there yet, but we use iTunes a lot, and we use a bunch of other different distribution services. And the way we do that is through online distribution platforms like TuneCore and CD Baby, which basically allow you as an artist or you as a label to upload your music on there, and then they fan it out to all of these distribution platforms. And that's something anyone can do. So you could record a song in GarageBand on your computer, you can upload it through TuneCore, and they do a basic search to make sure you're not violating anyone else's copyright, you're not uploading someone else's song, and then they publish to all of these platforms for a minimal fee, for something like $50 a year. So artists used to have to sign with a label that would, you know, where the contract terms were, we're going to spend $20,000 on promoting you and getting you out to all these platforms, so we're going to take that $20,000 out of your income for the next 5 years. And that's why it's really difficult for musicians to make a decent living from music sales when they work with labels. So this is one of our albums on iTunes, where we post all of our albums on iTunes because it is the biggest way in which people consume here in the States. But we also distribute through Bandcamp, which is becoming more and more popular, not only in the States, but all over the world, because whereas iTunes still doesn't exist in a lot of countries because of intellectual property disputes and issues and concerns about piracy, Bandcamp is available anywhere. And musicians all over the world, especially in Africa, especially in South Africa and Kenya and Nigeria, use Bandcamp to distribute their music. So here's one of our artists on there, and you guys were listening to our other Discover PeaceTones album also on Bandcamp. But yeah, I mean, I mentioned this a little bit before, but a lot of the barriers to digital distribution are going to keep, they exist now, they're going to keep existing, and so we have to figure out innovative ways to get around them until intellectual property regimes are strong enough to protect artists' rights, and until transactional laws open up so that anyone, anywhere can use PayPal, because PayPal doesn't exist for a lot of countries still. So one way in which we are looking into, and we're doing research, is the use of mobile phones to stream music. A lot of the communities we work in, people are no longer on analog phones because we work in urban areas. So they have smartphones. They might not be iPhones, but they're Blackberries, or Huawei is big in Kenya, which is a Chinese brand. And the telecom companies are capitalizing on the fact that so many people are adopting smartphones by using music streaming as a way to get people to sign up for pay-as-you-go credit with their particular company. So Safaricom will compete with another company by saying, well, if you sign up with us, you get 500 free songs through Safaricom, or you get 300 minutes of free streaming. And so they're using music as an add-on and as a way to get people to adopt their particular cell phone plan, which is a huge opportunity for musicians, but it's also so new. It's literally something that started happening in the last year or two, that musicians and labels are only just becoming aware, and they're so eager to get on these platforms that they're giving their music away for free. So as far as I know, there are music streaming platforms and there are telecom companies using music, but musicians are getting maybe 5% of every dollar earned, 10% at the very most. And that's the musician and their label and their manager. They get that amount and then they have to split it all amongst themselves. So there is huge opportunity with all of these different platforms coming out. The Clique is a big one. BlackBerry Music is huge in Haiti. But with that opportunity also comes the danger of just the current model of exploitation being imported into a brand new system, which is sort of how things are happening now. So our next project is PeaceTones Kenya. I'll talk to you a little bit about it. In February and March, we're going to be conducting these workshops and then selecting 24 musicians out of those workshops to be in our contest. In July, we'll go back and organize intertribal peace concerts and record the album with the winner from our contest. And one thing that's new that we haven't done before is to try and mentor the remaining artists who didn't win the contest through running their own crowdfunding campaigns for their own releases. And in that way, we don't just have one big winner, but we're trying to help everyone have the opportunity to kind of fundraise for themselves to release their own music. And I released the album in the fall, hopefully. And we continue mentoring all of the artists that we've worked with in the past. So they contact us with legal questions, and then we find them a lawyer in the country to work with them, or they'll contact us and say, hey, do you know if there are any gigs that are happening in New York that I can jump onto because I'm going to be in New York, and we try and organize that stuff for them. And so we're constantly trying to incorporate new things into our model as well as the music business changes, and it's changing very rapidly. Another thing that I'm going to try and do on this trip is try to arrange something called gig swapping with musicians in Nairobi specifically. And this is something that comes out of Brazilian cooperative models for musicians. There's an organization called Forra de Eixo, which means off-axis. And it's a network of musicians all over Brazil who basically communicate with each other through something like Craigslist, basically a listserv, where they say, I live in Rio, I have a fan base of about 500 people who I know are guaranteed to show up to any show I play. I want to come up and play in Salvador and Bahia, but I have no fans there. But I see that there's a band over there that also has 500 fans. So I contact that band and I say, hey, if I come up there and play with you, we'll double bill and we'll split the profits from that show. And then anytime you want to come down to Rio, you can do the same with me. And so we're going to try and do something like that in Nairobi, because the communities we work with are so spread apart. I mean, it's only 15 or 20 kilometers, but to them it's sort of a world apart. There's no reason for them to interact with each other. And that kind of contributes to the tension between these different communities because they don't cross over to each other's communities. There's no incentive to. So if we can create a touring and a concert incentive for them to go and play in someone else's community, it fosters that exposure on a very micro level. We're not talking about global, we're talking about within one city. But as one of you guys asked, do you work in places where there isn't interstate political conflict? Yeah, because we work in communities where there can be political conflict or tension within a span of 50 kilometers that can cause as many deaths or as much violence as an interstate conflict. So that's it for my presentation, but I'm definitely looking forward to talking with you guys and hearing your questions.
No question. So you showed the analytics, and I think those give a good idea about exposure, but how do you measure social impact?
That's a good question. That's something that right now we have to measure through exposure and through touch points on YouTube and Facebook and stuff like that. It's kind of difficult for us to measure social impact because we're not there and we can't go around and do surveys with the community and see how the music has impacted them. But yeah, so the only way we can do that from afar is through metrics.
I mean, because you have a lot of lyrics. I mean, it's just kind of interesting to break down what part of the song is truly influential. If it's going to be just music that maybe it's in a language people don't understand, or if it's, or if the person's speaking in an accent or in a quick way that you can't really understand what's being said, as opposed to focusing on just the printed words, the message.
That's a good. We actually have anecdotal, some good stories. One is, Juanito, the guy who won our contest, one of his songs is called Gadam Rev, which means keep it in your dreams in Haitian Creole. And it was the second song on the album. It wasn't the one we chose to release as a single or promote at first, but it was the one that got the most traction on the ground in Haiti. And the song is basically about a kid who's 17 years old, so Juanito singing about himself, who gets his girlfriend pregnant by accident, and both of them get kicked out of their houses, and they have to go up north and live in the village, and he has to farm, and he's really stressed out, and he's like, how am I going to support my girlfriend, how am I going to support my child, I don't have an education, and then at the end of the song, he wakes up and it was all a dream. So the moral of the song is keep it in your dreams until you're ready to have kids. And so we could see from Facebook and YouTube that this song was taking off and was going viral. But what was really cool is we found on YouTube a video posted from someone that we didn't know who had recorded kids singing in the street of a different city, not of Port-au-Prince. They were singing Gadam Red. They were just like hanging out singing this song. And so there's little stories like that where you can see this song that has a really powerful public health message was not put out by the UN or the WHO, and so it doesn't have that like public announcement feel. Yeah, is sort of being integrated by the community and taken on. We translate the lyrics. We try to translate the lyrics of all the songs that are not in English, so that Western audiences who speak English can understand, or so that audiences in Brazil who are listening to our Haitian music at least have English as a medium in which they can understand the lyrics. And that's something we're working on as well. We want to figure out a way in which our musicians from one country can interact with our musicians from another country, and language is a barrier there, so we're trying to figure that out.
Ruha, is there anything you wanted to play on YouTube? We could do it on my laptop if...
Let me think about it. I had something, but now I forgot.
Right. Absolutely.
Go ahead.
How did the social justice or positive message requirement component become a part of this approach? Like, was that just part of a values thing in the beginning, or is it like help with funding from the West, if you have that? And then how do you determine what is a positive message? Because I'm assuming, like, you can still get these communal effects and aspirational feelings through songs that don't necessarily have a direct social justice message, that can still bring people together and have a sense of community.
No, that's a good question, and we keep the social justice message thing pretty broad. The requirement came about because we started out very much as a rule of law, access to justice initiative. And the idea is identify messages that have net positive impact in a community and help those messages get funded and continue to get funded. And so the positive impact in the community thing is, okay, so your message has to be social justice. But one of the things, I just had a phone call with our partners in Kenya this morning, and one of the questions was, they were like, well, we've been talking to musicians and we've said, yeah, only social justice messages. And people have said, well, does gospel count? You know, can I sing about Jesus? Can I do, like, what does that mean? What does justice mean? And the concept of justice or social justice doesn't necessarily translate in every community. And it's called so many different things in so many different places. But the basic idea is that your message has to have, I guess your intent is to bring positivity to your community in whatever way, or address issues in your community that you don't like, that you want to see changed.
Does it have to be all their songs, or just the ones they try out with, or?
It's just the ones they try out with, but we want to see at least 3 songs that are original that have positive messages. Yeah. Because part of it is just helping the music industry in general evolve, but the other part is specifically addressing this hybrid of community engagement and community justice and entertainment. So it's sort of like edutainment, but...
So is there a tension there when, like, say, you've got 24 to choose from, so you can only have 12, or there's a couple of them that have a really good message, but, you know, it's kind of a boring song. You know?
Yeah.
Like, is there a tension there within the organization, or do you call upon the local community for tiebreakers or something to kind of like, well, how does this, it may sound boring to you, but like, what?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And before we started doing the contest format, which addresses that so that we didn't have to choose, we're like, oh man, this guy sounds so boring, or his voice, he just like cannot hold a tune. But who am I as a human rights lawyer to decide that this guy can't sing? So that's why we put it out to a contest. But before we did the contest, and this is before my time, we would identify nonprofits in the community, have them reach out and have musicians come and audition, and then we would just choose the musicians we liked. And a lot of that music ended up being kind of boring and not that good. So in order to increase the quality of the music, because in order for this model to work, the music has to be marketable, and it has to be economically viable. So in order to increase the quality of the music and increase the exposure for the musicians we did have coming to us, we brought in this contest format.
So then how do you, sorry, how do people vote then? Like, so, you know, different contexts, say some people use Facebook, sometimes they don't, so
Yeah.
is that part of the organization's role to like reach out and tell people, hey, can you come vote on this thing?
We do it within the states, so, and we run the contest on Facebook.
Oh, it's just in the US that people vote?
It's anywhere.
Oh, okay.
So we do publicity amongst our fans that have liked us on our Facebook page, and we send out email blasts to people who follow us as a nonprofit, but then we really have the artists, we put the onus on the artists to publicize within their own communities. Because the whole point, I mean not the whole point, but 50% of the point of this is to get them to start using Facebook or whatever social media platform is the most relevant in their community. If Facebook didn't exist in Nairobi, but an equivalent existed, we would use that platform. And then we would have a separate contest on Facebook, which is where we engage with our fans the most. But a huge point of this is to get them to engage with social media to bring people to their music.
How do they access these? What do they have?
Cyber cafes, a lot of times, yeah. And we've thought about doing, go ahead.
Yeah, we also have to train them how to use the internet, or are they literate enough to use it?
The musicians we work with are literate enough, and that's something, I was thinking about this on my way here, you know, a lot of ICT for development work is in very rural areas with people who have analog phones and don't have access to the internet. And so one critique of our project could be, well, you're not reaching last mile communities. And my response to that is we have a very specific target population. It's urban youth living often in the capital city of a country who do have access to computers, who know how to use them, who even have access to the internet and social media a lot of times, but they need that extra level or that extra layer of expertise in order to capitalize those tools for what they're trying to do. Go ahead.
I think that there's a demand for the sampling of old music and like in the US and in Europe. But what is your attitude towards connecting these artists with American producers? Like, I know that it's been like heavily publicized how like Diplo or a producer
Yeah.
such as like that would like go to certain parts of the world and find these artists. But is there a way to or I don't know, what is your attitude towards them? Like, do you think there are ways to connect these different types of artists or musicians together in like a fair way?
Yeah, I don't think it's problematic. If Sony came and wanted to sign one of our artists, I would be so happy for them. Because right now they have a really fair deal with us, but we're not making them millions of dollars. They may make 90% of what we make for them, but it's in the hundreds or the thousands of dollars. If Sony came and signed them, even though they're making 10% of whatever it is, it could be millions. But what we want them to know and what we encourage them to do is that they can negotiate terms. They should be able to read the contract and understand what these obligations are and understand that they can negotiate them. And that comes back to the legal aspect of what we do. A lot of times musicians and also people in communities where where society is very hierarchical and where people feel ashamed of questioning or negotiating because they feel like you're being too aggressive. In a lot of cultures, like in my culture and in Singapore where we both lived for a long time, if you're a student and someone's a teacher, you don't question them, it's rude. And so that relationship gets translated into, I'm a musician and this is Sony, like who am I to question it, I'm just gonna sign. And so that's something that we teach. When this relationship with this company or this organization is gonna be determined by this piece of paper for the next 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, you should read it and you should question it and you should try to negotiate, and the worst they can say is no. Like, no, it's not negotiable. And then you can decide to take it or leave it. So that's sort of, we just try to have these artists have more agency in the relationships that they do create.
What were some of the takeaways in terms of implementation? What were the things that worked and what were the things that were hardest?
That's a good question. I think it's been very different in every community we've worked in. The main takeaway is to understand that your model is always going to have to change, but that you have to balance that with having some kind of consistency across different projects. And so, you know, when we were working in Haiti, and it was a struggle because some people didn't know how to turn a computer on, and they were in our contest, and so those people were in the same room, in the same workshops as people who already had a Facebook page or already had been on YouTube. And so we learned from that and we figured out, okay, well, how do we subtly have people self-select so they understand the technologies they're going to be working with. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. For example, if someone wanted to come to this class, but they were, they hadn't gone to high school yet, you would say, no, you're not ready for that yet. Why don't you do these other steps? And here are resources in which you can take these other steps first. So it's like, part of it is understanding your target population, but the other half of it is understanding what you offer and who's going to benefit from it and who's not. And there's no point trying to give what you offer to someone who's not going to be able to receive it properly.
Cool. Maybe I have a follow-up question about your social enterprise model.
Yeah.
Right? You talk about a lot of projects not being sustainable in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you mentioned that PeaceTones is a nonprofit. So what is your business model, and what is, sustainability for the organization?
Yeah. That's a good question, because we ourselves are not a social enterprise. We are just a pure nonprofit, but we try to work with the musicians to have them create social enterprises around their work. So we make our income from grants and donations and crowdfunding. So a lot of the crowdfunding we do, some of it is for the organization, some of it is musician specific. In terms of long-term goals, I think we're always going to have some portion of what we do funded by grants or funded by donations of some sort, because if we were to make this a for-profit model, or at least try to earn back everything that we put into it from the musicians themselves, we would become like any other record label and take between 40 and 80% of album income, because that's actually how much it takes to do what we do. That's how much it costs. So a lot of times people who work in the nonprofit sector or musicians think of labels as evil and like stealing money from musicians, and it's not always necessarily the case. It's that there's a lot of bureaucracy, especially with the big labels. There's a lot of bureaucracy that goes into the kinds of publicity that they do. We're much more lean, and we bootstrap a lot more. And we teach the musicians, in my ideal world, none of these musicians would be on our label. They would all just be doing it themselves, because then we don't expend resources, and they get every dollar they put in, or every bit of energy they put in, they get that dollar straight to them. And with the tools that exist out there on the internet now, you can cobble together the equivalent of an entire label just from all of these different platforms. So you as a musician can do all of that yourself, but you have to think like a business person.
Challenging.
Yeah. And it's not for everyone. Go ahead.
How did you approach these communities? What was your strategy for getting your message out? How did you get on public radio? I know this is kind of a very sexy topic. Everybody knows about music, and it's probably become rich, and so maybe you didn't have that hard time. But what was your initial steps to get your foot in the door in these places?
Well, and it's different in every community. In Haiti, we went to Port-au-Prince with the head of the Haitian Coalition of Somerville in Boston, and his brother worked at the national television station, so completely random. In Kenya, we didn't have that luxury, but in every community we go in, we identify local partners that already have a lot of traction in their communities, that are already running events for hundreds of people. So we know that they know how to get the word out to hundreds of people or thousands of people about something. So in Nairobi, we're working with 3 grassroots organizations, all of whom have access to hundreds or thousands of people. And we've told each of them that we want 100 musicians to attend the workshops. And so, and we've also distributed a baseline survey through them to start collecting information about what musicians know already, what kinds of knowledge they want to learn, what they need. So those baseline surveys are already being run by these grassroots organizations before we even arrive.
Do you find them on the internet, or do you?
We find them through our scouting trip. So I went down there a year and a half ago. Some of it you can do through the internet. You make one point of contact, but then when you land, you have them introduce you to other people. You have those people introduce you to other people. So it's like networking. there's a lot of schmoozing and networking that you have to do in order to like find the right people. And then in between meeting the people on the ground and going back to implement, we had a year and a half to vet people, and a lot of people flaked out and didn't end up coming through, and we had enough time to recover from that and find other people to fill their places. So I would say when you're evaluating potential partners, leave enough time to see if they actually follow through on what they've said they will do before you have to rely on them.
I was interested in finding out more about your donors, and if that's something that's kind of internal and you can't discuss, that's okay. But I wonder if they're, kind of the usual suspects, or it's more music-based.
It's actually, because we're a justice initiative, we have funding from rule of law funders. So like the American Bar Association's World Justice Project funded our first 3 projects. And then we have arts funding, but a lot of our funding comes from individual donors because it's, like he said, it's kind of an exciting and sexy project and people like the idea of it. And there's a dual function of individual donors. They give you money, but they're also a potential purchaser of an album when the music comes out, and they're already invested because they've supported the nonprofit, and now they see the product coming out of it, and they're really excited about it, and they spread the word to their friends, and so on and so forth. So we're trying to build a donor base for the nonprofit, but we're also trying to build a fan base for the musicians at the same time. And there's a huge overlap between those 2 populations.
Has there ever been any interest shown by the kind of mainstream music industry in using PeaceTones as kind of a scouting program for themselves?
Yeah, we were actually in talks with MTV Exit. So MTV Exit specifically focuses on human trafficking. And so we were talking to them about doing a project in Brazil, but our missions we thought came together, but then ended up being, because they're very, very specifically about human trafficking. And a lot of what we do is exposing messages and getting the word out about certain issues. In the place we were trying to work in, human trafficking and sex work is very taboo, and you can't really sing or talk about it openly without having a lot of, messy repercussions. So we figured, okay, well, let's leave that for now, and that's not the right approach. And there are other under-the-radar ways in which to deal with trafficking in that particular community. So we've had interest from them in that sense. I think we're still, we've also, in Haiti, for example, producers and record labels that are more famous have paid attention to us now that one of our artists got really big. But it's sort of a work in progress, and we don't really want too much. We don't want to align ourselves too much with mainstream music and entertainment industries, because often we diverge from them in wanting, for us, income isn't as important as exposure for a good message. So if those things diverge, we're like, okay, well, we're not going to explore that right now.
You were beginning to address what I was going to ask, which was, you began the presentation talking about the value of music as a sort of cultural artifact.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think, and since you just asked about the convergence of mainstream production and these local artists, what do you think is the cultural significance or social impact of doing that in terms of how they look at an instrument of culture being, valued in this,
In another way.
What do you think is cultural impact or social impact of introducing American or European production with these local artists?
Okay, I see what you're saying. I think a lot of the work we do in terms of multimedia work is we are bringing a Western lens to local cultural artifact, and part of the reason for that is branding it so that it can sell in the West. but that kind of activity is already happening on the ground in a lot of these places and has been happening. I would say even since the 60s, Western labels have been coming and packaging and reselling in the West. What we try to do is engage local partners. So in Nairobi, for example, we're running a photography workshop and videography workshop for local photographers to teach them the tools of how to use this equipment so that they can continue making music videos for people once we've left. And then it's from a Kenyan perspective. But I will say that the Kenyan perspective, at least in Nairobi, is pretty westernized. In fact, something I struggle with personally is my preference in world music is much more roots, and it's not reggae and hip hop and rap because I can get that here. I don't want Haitian reggae. I want Jamaican reggae. But that's a personal preference, and I have to make sure not to let that bleed into the work we do, because if a Haitian artist wants to express themselves through reggae, then they should be allowed to do that. And there's a lot of cultural appropriation that happens on a global scale because of the internet and because of all of these tools that people are using. So YouTube, I like to say, like, YouTube is the new public radio and Facebook is the new public square. And they're global. So now you can go on YouTube sitting in a cyber cafe in Kibera and listen to Jay-Z and think, that guy's really cool, I want to sing like him. And so another reason we put this to a contest is I don't want to make the decision that someone singing like Jay-Z from Kibera is not good, because who am I to say? So going back to trying to create an economically viable cultural artifact that also has big impact, when we put it to a contest, we let a general audience worldwide decide what they want to listen to and what they want to pay for.
Wow. Well, thanks. Let's thank Ruha. Awesome. I mean, it's really awesome. I mean, in the ICTD world, it's one of the more innovative, very kind of progressive thinking, lots of innovation and new business models, disrupting the rules. So really cool. So happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, so for class on Monday, remember the proposal. So make sure you get together with your groups, and then do the draft marketing proposal. If you have any questions, just email me, and then do the readings for Monday, and we'll talk about using this as a segue into the overarching issues. Okay, thanks.